All right. So today I will be talking to you about what is that weed. If any of you are new or transitioning farmers, you know that weeds are a part of everything we do. And so I thought it would be great to just kind of have this overview and share some tools that really helped me while I was in school. And I hope that they help you as well. My information is on the slide here, my email address. And if you have your phone available, you can scan the QR code to visit my LinkedIn and just see what exciting things I have been up to. So first, I just want to start with a little webinar etiquette. I want you all to check that you can hear me. So if you can't hear me, I ask that you raise your hand and make sure you do check your on-screen audio session settings. Q&A will be held at the end. Please use the Q&A button on your screen to ask me any questions. While the chat will be monitored, we will try to refrain from using the chat for Q&A just so that they do all stream into one place and we don't miss those questions. This webinar will be recorded and uploaded in about a week to our website. And if you're interested in any future webinars, please feel free to check those out at rodellinstitute.org. All right, so just getting started, I wanted to give you all a little bit of my background. So I joined Rodell Institute about 7 months ago. I came from what you all would call big ag, and I decided that I needed a change. I got my PhD from Mississippi State University in weed science, and our consulting department took a chance on me and brought me over. And I'm so happy that I'm here to be consulting and being able to interface with farmers on a daily basis. I always say that I am the answer hub for anyone in the Southeast. So if you have any friends or family that are looking to transition to organic, or if they're already organic and just need some additional support, please feel free to reach out to our consulting department. Additionally, I attended Fort Valley State University for my bachelor's and received that in plant science and biotechnology. And I also have a master's from Auburn University in plant breeding. So now we will begin with our introduction. And please visit the chat. Our tech support is here. Mr. Justin Barclay. He is with our education department and he has listed his number if you do have any issues that need to be addressed quickly. So, introduction to weed management. So this is just going to be a brief overview. I thought it would be best if I gave you kind of an introduction on how I diagnose weeds and what they look like and the technical definitions that I use as a weed scientist. Of course, we know what this is. This is a dandelion. We consider it a weed. We most definitely do. We've got some chamomile here. Of course, we're used to seeing this ragweed across buildings. And then most people don't know that a sunflower can definitely be a weed. So what do these all have in common? They're all growing in unwanted areas. So whenever we look to define what a weed is, they're undesirable economic pests. Any plants growing out of place. So we think about volunteer plants. So anything like a corn stalk that likes to pop up in soybean fields, that's usually one that we see often. That is considered a weed, even though we call it a volunteer corn plant. And then again, a plant growing anywhere that it's not wanted. Technically, the definition is any plant that is objectionable or interferes with the activities or welfare of man or ecosystem. With that broad definition, we kind of have to look at what those characteristics are of things that we consider weeds and how they get categorized this way. But we look at great germination under varied environments. So a lot of times it doesn't matter how hot or how cold it is, these plants are going to survive. We might see our crops get burned, but we actually see a lot of resiliency in weeds. They often have a high level of dormancy and seed longevity. During my PhD, I worked in rice. I worked in a weed that is slowly becoming a super weed in rice production. And this was one of the characteristics. The seeds could survive for 10 years in the seed bed, and they also survived through different planting seasons. And it wasn't until rice was put back in the field that we would see that we have this red rice problem. Additionally, they grow fast. So a lot of times we look at this as we get that really, really good rain, and then we start to see these plants pop up. Those are our weeds. We can quickly identify them that way. There's a high amount of seed production. So one of the troublesome weeds in the Southeast is Palmer amaranth. One seed or one plant can put off more than 1 million seeds. And that's just one in one area. And later I'll show you kind of some scientific backing as to why Palmer is such a bad problem for us. These weeds can cross-pollinate. So think about evolution. So we often think about resistance and how these plants are able to have this type of resistance. It's because they're growing at the same time as our crop of interest, and they're taking on some of that genetics into their next generation. They have adaptations for short and long distance dispersal. So think about how when you blow a dandelion, it just kind of floats away. That can actually attach to your clothes and you not even know it. And then you can carry it to somewhere else and cause a dandelion problem that there never was one for in the first place. We see vigorous vegetative reproduction and regeneration. So think about your grass weeds. A lot of times we see that we can mow those back, and sometimes they come back 2 and 3 times stronger than what they were before. And that's just one of those aspects of being a weed. Sometimes they can be brittle. So being able to snap them and then they hit the ground and they're able to do what they need to do there. And they have the ability to compete by special means. So sometimes this can be deeper root architecture, growing taller so that they can take up all of the sunlight and keep it from the plant of interest. They have the ability that once they're cut, they can just sprawl out and pop up somewhere else. So there are a lot of ways that weeds can be characterized, but these are just some of the things that we look for. Who or what determines what a weed is? We all do. Like, I can do it. You can do it. We can all do it. This is like one of my favorite pictures because no one wants to be responsible for a weed problem, but everyone wants to be the person who's able to discover this problem and be able to solve it. So we're all responsible for identifying these weeds, being able to report that there is a problem, especially with resistance, so that we can start to deal with this problem and not have it continue and grow worse after years. I always show this as far as us determining what is a weed and what is not a weed. We have here, this is a pasture. We see the deer. This is actually food. It's a great pollinator garden. And we can also see some of those same flowers that are in the field here growing on the sidewalk here. So in certain situations, take our pasture, for instance, these are not weeds. Interesting story. I had gone to do an internship and they just planted a pollinator garden. And it was a running joke that everyone's like, I bet you want to go outside and you just want to just demolish all those plants. And I'm like, the one thing that keeps me from doing it is that it is a pollinator habitat and we are doing good in the world. Anywhere else, this would not be acceptable, especially not in front of a building. And then, just going over, we see that, yes, in the other picture, because this can cause a hazard, this is a weed. We see that a lot of times our departments of transportation or safety will usually apply herbicides or go out and mow to get rid of these issues anywhere that they pop up. So again, this is just another picture. As I mentioned, when we see volunteer plants in the field, you can see the corn stalks and they are everywhere in this soybean field. So a lot of times this happens during harvest. They might not have done the correct adjustments. They bumped an ear of corn and now we have volunteer corn in the field. And it can be a big problem when it comes to harvesting soybeans. So some of the adverse effects that we have, a lot of people know that giant ragweed is a huge allergen, especially in the springtime. Skin irritation. Some people are so sensitive to it that it causes them to itch or creates rashes. This picture is always interesting. You wouldn't consider this tree a weed, but in this instance, it is a problem because it's decreasing the visibility of this sign. It's supposed to be a stop sign back there and you can barely see it. Additionally, we look at fire hazards, invasive weeds growing in areas that have wildfires. Those tend to lean to tinder and cause those fires to continue to spread. They can be shelter to insects and pests. And as this picture shows here, they can impede water flow. So we always want to make sure that this is an aquatic weed that looks like it is growing in a bayou of some sort. And someone has the job of going and scooping out all of these aquatic weeds and putting them elsewhere or getting them ready to be burned so that they don't contaminate the water flow. So in agriculture, we look at it in our crops and vegetables. They decrease yield, they can increase injury to crops, and they create physical barriers. So again, imagine having to try and take your combine out there and it's just an overgrowth of weeds. You might have an issue there. In pastures, we run the risk of injuring the digestive tract of livestock livestock. They can decrease milk and meat quality in certain animals, and it decreases wool quality in sheep. So we want to make sure that they're getting the nutrients they need and not being able to feed on these weeds that may crop up in their field. So what is the impact here? What do we want to do? We need to consider weed management early and often. It is difficult to eradicate weeds once they have established. And on the consulting team, we hear this quite a bit. We have people who have tried to mow. We have people who, when they went into plant, they needed to do some additional weed management practices to ensure that their in-between rows are clear. So you need to be able to scout this early. And we always question how much weed control is enough. In the normal world, 95% is great. But when it comes to weed control, it's not enough. Scientifically, they have determined that 5% of a weed population can produce seeds into the next growing season. And as I mentioned, Palmer amaranth produces more than, this one says 500,000 seeds from one plant. So in order for us to have the expected outcome, we need more than 99.99% weed control, and that's impossible. So in order for us to overcome this, we have to use the tools that are available to us. Just as an additional support here, I've highlighted some of the problematic weeds that we have in the Southeast. As you can see, Palmer in a soybean crop with one weed per foot reduces the soybean yield by 64%. Common cocklebur, same thing in soybeans with one weed per foot, reduces the yield by 87%. Same thing in cotton, it reduces the yield by 40 to 60%. And then when we look at Canada thistle and wheat, one weed per 3 feet squared can reduce the yield by 60%. These have all been shown, and I'm sure that these numbers have gotten worse considering we do deal with resistance management throughout. And these numbers are from the 70s, or here's one from the 60s. So even though this research is a little old, it's still supported and we can still demonstrate this in a field. In this next study, we looked at what happens when we don't clear fields or we don't control weeds in our fields. We see here we have morning glory harvested with cotton, and then how much cotton was left in the field. We're looking at this as a percent, and we're looking at the density of morning glory plants per 15-meter row. So at 0 morning glory plants, we leave less cotton in the field. But as we increase that number of morning glory plants, we can see that we're harvesting more morning glory and leaving behind a large amount of cotton. And that is an economic hit that no one can really afford. So now, how do we control this? This is my favorite part of the presentation. This is what I was excited about being able to share with everyone. My favorite weed identification tools that will help you, in a bind, if you are interested in understanding weeds, if you have an urge to understand weed science, these tools will be your best friend. So for each of these tools, I have included the website for you to be able to search and just a screenshot of what you're looking for once you do get to the website. I am going to pull those up so that we can just see what they look like together. So my first tool that I enjoy is from the University of Wisconsin. And what they have is that you can search by your location. So I'm here in Georgia. And then here they define the different weed types. Are they broadleaf? And they give you a definition. Is it grass-like or is it something woody? Once you're able to select which type you have, we're going to go with, say, a broadleaf weed, and we're going to go to step 2. From here, you are able to answer all of these questions about what type of plant you are seeing. Is this in an agriculture field? So are you seeing this, let's say, in vegetable crops? Is this an urban area or is this in a garden? Is this turf or lawn? Growth forms, does it grow straight up? Is it spreading out? Is it creeping up something? Are the tips pointed up? So we can select any of these. Is it an annual, biennial, perennial? Are there tendrils, milky sap? All of these characteristics separated by leaf type. So if you leave all of these empty and we say, let's search the database, there's nothing in Georgia that grows in a vegetable crop that is upright and perennial. You can do these for anything that you see. They give you a lot of information on what you're looking for. So if they ask about petioles and you're not familiar with what a petiole is, it gives you a picture. It's asking, is it present or is it absent? And this is for any of these characteristics. When you're looking at the stem, are the stems square? The leaves on flowering stems, so looking at where the flowers are coming from, do they have spines? All of these characteristics will help you narrow down what kind of plant you have or what weed you have just based on what you're able to observe. I encourage everyone with these tools that we're going through, I encourage you to take a look, play with them, go out into your yard, pick anything that you think is a weed and start to look at and dissect that plant. If it's flowering, look and see what kind of flowers it has. Answer these questions, and I guarantee that these resources will help you narrow down what it is that you have in your field and help you diagnose what it is. Additionally, they do have a weed selector tool. So if you know exactly what it is that you have by its scientific name or by its common name, I always like to discuss Palmer, one of those weeds, I guess because we hear so much about it here in the Southeast. And what would usually happen is there would be the scientific name, the common name, and you would get a picture of what it looks like to be able to do that comparison. So again, this is from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They have their weed ID tool and their weed selector tool. This is provided by their extension service. So it's a great resource. I believe that it is. So then our next resource that we will go to is another by Virginia Tech. So this is coming out of their College of Agriculture. So what we see here is that we can browse these leaves. We can browse again, similar to how we did with the UW-Madison website. So again, you're asking, what is the growth habitat? Again, they provide these pictures so that you can get a better definition of what you're selecting. So is it upright and non-woody? Are there thorns present? Is it spines present? Anything of that nature? All the way down to the bottom, they're asking you all the way to ochrea. What is this present here? Are you seeing this growth here? Are your leaves attached just at that base? So you can identify all of these characteristics. And then additionally, if you know what it is that you're looking for, it will give you pictures, common names. So I know that a lot of times what we call things in the Southeast may not be the same on the West Coast or even in the Northeast. So being able to have these common names and know when you're asking someone a question about these weeds, they may not know it as Canada thistle. They may know it as California thistle or creeping thistle or field thistle, but these are all going to be the same thing. And they've provided additional pictures to help you identify this weed either in your field or in your yard. So they're looking at the root structure, that stem. So again, one of the questions was stem, is it a square stem? Is it a round stem? So all of these are available. And then of course, once you know what it is, you can always go in Google to find more pictures that look similar to what you are looking for. So this resource again is through Virginia Tech's College of Agriculture and Life Science. I think what I should do, if you're interested in keeping a running list of these, I will drop them in the chat so that you have them available just in case. So those are our first two resources. So going back here, our next resource comes from the University of California Ag and Natural Resources. So they have a very well-maintained IPM website. And what I love about this website is that they do give you a weed photo gallery. I have used this website in the past to teach students about developing a key to identify weeds. So a lot of times, instead of just diving straight in and saying, okay, I need to figure out what it is I have this picture. Sometimes it's a lot easier to just start with their tutorial. So the great thing about this is that they give you these identifying parts of the plant so that you can become more familiar with the technical terms that may be asked about you. Or the plant that you're trying to diagnose. They have a list. So again, broadleaf, grass list, sedge list, aquatic list, a ton of resources on their website for IPM. Again, love this because it is a very well put together gallery. These are separated by, again, leaves, so you can narrow them down even further. So again, are they spreading plants? Do they have rosettes? Are the leaves in a whorl that just go around that stem in a circle? You can use a diagnostic tool here to look at the leaf type. So we're always going through, I always encourage to go through this and answer those questions and say, okay, it is spreading. So if it is spreading, here are some common spreading weeds. Feel free to click on them. They do have pictures. So again, being able to see how this one is a Bermuda buttercup. So it does start with a bulb or a bulbette, as they call it, when you have the mature plant and the type of flower you're looking for. And they will even show you what it looks like when there's an infestation of this Bermuda buttercup. Gives you information about the reproduction. So this is important in managing weeds because you need to know when to terminate them. If you start to see this in your field, you should know that for anything that reproduces by bulbs and bulbettes, essentially you have to dig those up. They have to be killed. So those are good things to know when having to discuss weed management. So that is going to conclude the section on weed identification tools. So now what I want to move into, and I know a lot of people might be surprised that we're going to look at herbicide injury tools. Herbicide injury tools are very, very important when trying to diagnose a problem in your field. So imagine that you have some neighbors who are still dependent on herbicides and you have planted your field, you've got you a barrier in place, but drift still happens, volatility in herbicides still happens, and some kind of way you get injury on your plants. What is there for you to do? So the first thing that I want to call your attention to is this great resource for corn and soybean herbicides. So these are going to be the usual herbicides that are applied in corn and soybean fields. The reason that I wanted to bring up this type of chart is because although you are growing organically, again, being able to understand what injury you're looking at so that you know how to deal with it and how to address it. So a lot of times in the weed science world, we're dealing with sites of action. So as you can see, these are by group numbers. So 1, 2, they don't necessarily go in order. These go all the way up to 27. We skip some numbers in between, but they're grouped by their impact on the plant and what they disrupt. So in this first level here, we have lipid synthesis inhibitors. So that's going to be your fatty acid pathway. So we're just disrupting that. And we see that this is site of action 1. We can also look and see how many resistant species we're dealing with. So that's going to be in this column here. We talk about the site of action. So it inhibits, it's an ACC-ACE inhibitor. So these are the specific chemistries that are developed for these herbicides. So you can know exactly where they attack in the plant. A lot of times it's good to know the chemical family so that you can these are kind of grouped together. You also look at these active ingredients. So we see that here on the list. So a lot of times they have similar names when we are diagnosing them, but we want to make sure that you're able to actually understand this chart and be able to see what is happening in your plants. And this will make more sense on the next slide. So again, different groups, we have lipid synthesis inhibitors, amino acids. So those are going to be your protein inhibitors, growth regulators. A lot of times these are synthetic auxins, so they're going to help. In some instances, they can help a plant, and of course, in large amounts, they can kill the plant. So this one's always interesting. This is where a lot of times we see drift from auxins onto tomatoes in this area, and the tomatoes will start to curl, the leaves kind of curl up. So it's always unfortunate when we do see this issue. When we look here at amino acids, we've got our glyphosate. Everyone knows about glyphosate, very well known pre-emergence herbicide that's applied before we even go into the field. Essentially kills everything that's not resistant to it. We have here pigment inhibitors. So these are going to be the ones that a lot of times change the color of the plant. So when a plant goes from green to white, they have a pigment inhibitor that is stopping this from happening. We also have photosynthesis inhibitors. So we know what happens in photosynthesis. If a plant can't go through photosynthesis, it can't produce any chlorophyll. So again, we start to see that plant die because they're not able to complete photosynthesis. Here we have seedling root growth inhibitors. So these are going to be those that specifically impact seedlings. So you can apply those. They're going to be contact herbicides a lot of times, and it makes these seedlings grow just really wonky. We have cell membrane disruptors. So a lot of times they cause the cell membrane to disrupt, and you can, here we end up seeing like burning with plants when they have been burnt by herbicides. A lot of times we know this is going to be a group 14 or a group 22. And then additional seedling shoot growth inhibitors. So this one's seedling root growth inhibitors. So I'm sorry, I confused these. Our root growth inhibitors, if you go and dig that plant up, it almost looks like the plants they couldn't go anywhere. They have like this tight fist when you're looking at the roots and they don't expand. Versus our seedling shoot growth inhibitors, again, when we're looking at the shoot, it's going to be what's kind of twisting, or we may see some color changes. And that's what's happening with this mode of action. So again, This is more so for those farmers who are transitioning or beginner farmers and you're trying to diagnose what's going on in your field. Sometimes there can be residual herbicides. So we always encourage our farmers to do soil health tests just so that we know what is residing there and how we can proceed going forward so that we can protect those crops going into the ground. Another great tool here, if you are a visual person, I am a visual person, I have to see what exactly it is that I'm talking about. So again, these are separated by injured at emergence versus injured after emergence. A lot of times the injured at emergence, these are going to be soil applied herbicides, or this is going to be from carryover. So this can be contaminated tanks. It can be leaching that happens and ends up in your soil. But these are those same characteristics that we go through and diagnose. The great thing about this tool, again, this one comes from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. You can start to use this as a key. So when you look at it, it asks, are the roots normal and the shoots are damaged? And then what's happening? Is it chlorotic? Or did they change colors? This is that green to white that we were talking about. So if we see this bleached leaves, we know that we have an HPPD inhibitor. So that helps us, or it could also be a group 13. Again, they appear the same, and there are additional characteristics that we can look at. So again, is it roots damage and stunted plants? So remember I said that it looks like those roots have those really, really tight, they can be like bound up, didn't unravel. So this is a characteristic of synthetic auxins. And you can see like these are soybean seeds. They were in the ground. They're starting to germinate, but they're not going to get much further than this because they're not able to get the nutrients they need. Again, those clubbed roots. So think about just a club. You see, again, they're elongated, but then we see this oblong shape at the end. That's going to be your microtubule inhibitors. So just starting to understand and diagnose these characteristics will make you better in the field and help you diagnose any issues that you may have. Now, in organic production, for the most part, we tend to see a lot of injured after emergence. The reason for this can be neighbors close to you if they have a larger amount of land. They a lot of times apply herbicides by plane. And what ends up happening, you cannot control where that, if you've ever seen water drop off a plane, it goes everywhere. There's no control and they're able to do it, but these are a lot of the injuries that we want you to be able to diagnose and see and be able to catch early. So again, we look at contact activity where these older leaves injured and there's no issue with new leaves. So then we're looking like broadleaves, more selectives and grasses. So we'll see a lot of this injury more so in our broadleaves versus those grass-looking types of weeds or plants, plants, because we're looking at injury to plants. And this is specifically in corn and soybean. Anything that translocates with systemic activity. So we see that the new leaves are injured and old leaves are not injured. So again, that green to white coming in contact with those HPPD inhibitors, causing bleaching here. Those auxins, again, how I told you that when those auxins cause things to grow really fast and really weird. So we've got lodging down here in corn. A lot of times we see chlorosis that's happening with our ALS inhibitors. So I definitely encourage everyone to familiarize yourself with using this key so that you can better diagnose any issues that you are having. And this resource is a PDF. So if anyone is interested in it, please send me an email. I'll be sure to throw that up at the end so that I can get that out to you. The next tool that we have, unfortunately, the website didn't work, which is common here. Just have to remember that taxpayer dollars are sometimes what helps us maintain these websites, and we always depend on grant funding to keep them going. The great thing about this website, if you are trying to understand herbicide chemistries and you want to be able to visually catch any injury, this is going to be your resource. You can actually go in, and if you know what type of herbicide someone is using and you want to make sure that you catch it early if any of your plants have been injured, you can actually go in and select what the chemistry is, the name of the herbicide, and you can actually look. If you're growing tomatoes, they will show you what that injury looks like by this herbicide on tomatoes. And there's a long list of plants, a lot of them, both crops, fruits and vegetables, row crops. You can find this long list. It's not a complete list, but more of your more common fruits and vegetables and crops that are grown. and keeping in mind that this is a UC, University of California resource. So a lot of them will be native to California. And then lastly, just being able to see the symptoms. So getting comfortable with noticing what those symptoms look like when coming in contact with herbicides is definitely a great resource. And this resource, like I said, it didn't load. And if I pull it up, it's just going to make me angry because I was trying to get it to work before you guys showed up. But if anyone is interested, of course, you can look at herbicide symptoms from the University of California Division of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Our next tool is another one that's interactive. So I can pull that one up. Again, University of Wisconsin-Madison, they are knocking it out of the park with their available tools. And there are a couple of their tools that are available as phone apps. So I definitely encourage you to familiarize yourself with these tools to just be more comfortable with answering these questions. So this tool, herbicide injury diagnostic tool, they walk you through and give you directions on how to utilize this. They do give some additional resources. And then you're straight into answering questions. Did this happen immediately after the crop emerged, or was this after crop emergence? So if we select after crop emergence, they take us to this next set. So question 2B is after crop emergence, the initial crop stand was uniform and the plants were vigorous. So they're asking what happened. Were they growing fine? And then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you saw this. And then they want to know about your symptoms. So if you say everything was fine, and then we go here and we say treated leaves are injured, but new growth is unaffected, we know that this is a contact herbicide. Or is this new leaves are affected and it's specifically near that apical meristem where these new tissues would come from? They're injured, but the older leaves are unaffected. So if we look here, again, we're trying to diagnose what happened. And so they're going to ask, is this a broadleaf or is this a grass? And so if we say it's a broadleaf, we get more questions. They want to know, again, just walking you through so that you don't get overwhelmed with trying to look at every symptom. They're going to walk you through each one of those. So now we know that we have a broadleaf versus a grass. They're diagnosing, are the leaves tightly rolled if this is a corn plant, or do we have cupping if this is in soybean? We look at the meristem. If there has been some type of injury to corn, we're actually able to just lift that whirl of leaves straight out of the plant. And this is characteristic of ACCase inhibitors. We look at, again, the soybeans. Do they have reddish veins? And again, plants gradually turn yellow and die. So this is a non-selective herbicide, and they give you kind of where you can look. So we are familiar with glyphosate. And this picture kind of distorted, but you can see that we've got this burning of the new leaves. We've got reddish here in the stem. So these are going to be characteristic of glyphosate injury in a plant. And you can click on this and it's going to go through and it's going to show you how this works, why there's injury, what it causes, and then again, give you some common names of household products for this type of injury. So a lot of times we know it as Roundup. So again, another great resource that easy to use and walk through. Let me put that one in the chat for you. The last tool that I did want to share is more so, this one is not specific to weeds. And this is one that I like to share because it specifically speaks to citizen science. This is a resource that depends on us to upload pictures to. And this is for any type of plant. You can look at the wild flora. They're looking at useful plants. You can diagnose weeds, invasive plants, and this is for anywhere on the globe. So they like to see this. They like to see contributions here. And this is an app. The app is called PlantNet. So if you do Google that or look it up in your app store, you should be able to see it. And this is the logo for that app. You take a picture of it. You answer some questions about, did you see the fruit? Are these the leaves? Is this the stem, to help you identify? And then based on that picture, it actually gives you a list of possible plants and it gives you a probability of what it is to that plant based on location, where it's growing. So this is for anything. If we have any enthusiasts about botany, if you go on hikes and you just want to know what a plant is, this is a very useful resource. Or even if you know what it is that you have, snap a picture and upload it and say that you know what it is so that we can continue to add to this resource. And again, this is just PlantNet. All right. So then now, I always say this, big stop, big letters. I want this to get your attention. Do not let cover crops become your next weed problem. I know that we use cover crops. We need them. They have a number of characteristics that are beneficial to us. But if you do not know how to properly manage your cover crops, you could actually be adding to your weed problem. This is the last section of this presentation before we go into the Q&A. This is just my shameless plug from the consulting department. Always know for selection and termination, know before you grow. Know your seed selection. What is it that you're wanting to use as your cover crop? Just a few points of interest. Be careful of vetch, use it with caution. The seeds are hard to characterize, so it's hard to catch them as being a weed if they do go beyond, and it produces a lot of seeds quickly. So when this is important when it comes to termination, that you are scouting your fields and watching out for these plants to go to flower, because they need to be terminated immediately or they will cause you a problem in the next growing season. We talk about crimson clover and annual ryegrass. These can sometimes overwinter. This means don't depend on a winter kill to terminate these crops. You have to still go out there and monitor and scout. And so your ways, of course, to plan to terminate these cover crops, you can have winter kill, we have roller crimping, you can mow these crops, or you can specifically till them into the land. Additionally, they do have a list of termination methods that work for selected cover crops. So we talk about annual ryegrass. Will this be terminated by winter kill? Maybe. Depends on the season and how mild the winter is. Does crimping work on it? In some situations, yes, but mostly no. Mowing doesn't work, but it's great if you're wanting to till it in. Sorghum Sudan grass is another one that we like to suggest as a cover crop. Winter killed, great for tillage, doesn't work well with crimping or mowing. It's going to come back. If you go in with any brassicas, your mustards, winter kill definitely, tillage, no crimping, no mowing. Rapeseed, if you're using this, may go in the winter time, may not. Great for tillage. And we have some legumes down here. So sunflower is a great one that it'll die if it, winter killed. It is great for crimping, roller crimping. You can mow it and it won't come back, or you can till it directly into the ground. So just keep this in mind when selecting your cover crops, as we all depend on them, but don't let them turn into a weed that can come back to haunt you later. So with that, I want to thank you all for taking time to listen to this webinar and just take a look at some of the tools that I love to use when identifying weeds and plants in fields. My email address is listed here. If anyone is on the call that needs assistance or just has a few questions, we do have our consulting department. I have listed our website that lists all of the services that we do provide, and it does also list out my team here that you see in this photo. And each of us is located in a specific region, and we are ready, willing, and excited to help anyone that needs it. And with that, we'll move into our Q&A session. So I do see that I have one question. And so this question says, are there any traps that can be used on field border to catch the drift and help identify? Yes, I always encourage people, if you have the space to do it, and you have the seed available, anything that is sensitive, if you specifically know what someone is using and you're trying to catch that drift, plant anything that would be sensitive to that herbicide. So a lot of times the go-to is tomato. Tomato is so sensitive, easy plant to grow, doesn't take a whole lot, but you will definitely be able to pick up on anything happening to those tomatoes or any type of herbicides coming over into your field if you are able to plant tomato. And I don't see any other questions. Oh, she said I was thinking more like like a device, not a plant. Not that I am aware of, but that would be a welcome technology, I'm sure. Like a card, we use them in calibration. A lot of times when we're trying to calibrate any type of sprayers, they're basically wet cards. So as soon as any type of moisture touches them, they do change colors, and you can kind of see how those drops accumulate. So of course, anything closer to you is going to be a large, like small cluster, you'll see that spray, versus something that's far away, you may only see a couple of drops. That's about all I know for a card. But if you send me an email, I can do a quick search and ask my team if anyone is familiar with any type of device available on the market. Oh, you guys are welcome. And please send me an email if you, I am more than willing to share this presentation. Or if you have any questions, if you run into any problems, if you have any interesting cases, I'm always interested in those. I'm still very closely I still work very closely with the weed science world. So we're always interested in what is out there and what may be a problem. We never know it's a problem unless someone brings it to us. And I'd much rather catch those problems early than late. And so stay in contact with your extension office. Make sure you utilize them if you see a huge problem that you haven't noticed before, because they are a great resource. And I specifically specialize in weed management. I am getting better and better, I think, every day in weed management and organic systems. So I'm excited about that. And so, yeah, with that, are there any other questions? If there are no additional questions, again, thank you all for attending this webinar. Please utilize us as a resource if you have any questions, and I hope you all have a great day.